Start with a quick overview then of the Doha peace talks and why the July 19 Declaration of Principles was seen as important.
Look, it was seen as important because this conflict has been going on since 2021. And one of the key sticking points from the very beginning was Kinshasa saying we are not going to negotiate with the M23 because they are not a Congolese rebel group. They are, in fact, a Rwandan-backed regional rebel group that Rwanda is using as a proxy. So the fact that we got these two parties to the table is already quite significant. And I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. But there has been, I think, a lot of bad faith on both sides. And that's why now we have this deadline that has passed without any substantial change on the ground at all.
What are the reasons, the main reasons behind this delay, the August 18 deadline for a final peace agreement?
Well, look, since the Declaration of Intent was signed in July, one of the key principles of that was a ceasefire. And this is crucial because this is a situation where we have populations living in chronic and very high insecurity, and there's a massive humanitarian and displaced persons crisis in the Eastern DRC. So time is really something we do not have. But ever since we had this ceasefire being signed, absolutely nothing has changed on the ground. Both parties have violated the ceasefire. The M23 committed a massacre of 300 civilians just several weeks ago. Both parties have had have spoken publicly in a very hostile manner about one another. I think the parties are still very, very far apart when it comes to any kind of substantive resolution of the fundamental issues. The other key thing is that because the because M23 is fundamentally a Rwandan-backed rebel group, and because many of the decisions that are made in Kigali, this isn't a peace process really that is taking place on its own. We also have another peace process under the mediation of the Americans, which is taking place in Washington between the Congolese government and the Rwandan government. And these are now running in parallel, but one peace process very much impacts the other. And I think DC is also not moving on very, very swiftly. And so what remains unresolved there inevitably impacts also what is happening between the M23 and the Congolese government in Doha.
Fighting in eastern DRC has intensified. The M23 has captured key cities like Goma and Bukavu. How does this affect the prospects for lasting peace?
Well, look, it's that acute crisis that, I mean, as I said at the beginning, this conflict started in 2021. But as you rightly say, at the beginning of this year, there was a massive escalation with the M23 capturing two provincial capitals, Goma and Bukavu. Now, that's obviously given the M23 and Rwanda significant leverage on the ground. What it means practically in the DRC is that those areas, the eastern DRC, are under control of a rebel movement. Kinshasa no longer has a functional administration there. The M23 has set up parallel administrations. Very simple things like bank transfers from Kinshasa aren't arriving in the east. So this is a really difficult situation, and the capture of those areas has highlighted both Kinshasa's weakness, especially the weakness of the army, but also I think the bigger intentions perhaps of the M23 and of its Rwandan backers, which to some extent at this point do seem to be a level of territorial control that of course a sovereign country cannot tolerate.
The rebels say the release of captives is necessary before negotiations can continue, while the government is preferring to address it within the talks. How usual is it for such disagreements to stall negotiations?
Look, I think this is really a detail. And again, I would say, for me, I interpret that as a fundamental sort of unwillingness at this point to make key concessions. Yes, that is one of the points that was put in the Declaration of Intent from July, and there have been meetings between the two parties with the Red Cross present. That is often the organization that helps mediate these kinds of situations where prisoners are involved. But it's also important to remember that the M23 is a non-state armed group that has taken up arms against the central government. And so obviously there is a violation of Congolese law there. In the context of conflicts, we often do have these kinds of negotiations around amnesty and so on and so forth. Those do take time. And we have to also remember that Kinshasa needs to be able to sell this particular peace deal and the terms thereof to its own population. So I think that it's very difficult for Kinshasa to argue that it's making concessions to a rebel group that is controlling vast areas of the eastern part of the DRC. It's something that they need to weigh as well. So there's all these factors factors are factoring into how these steps are actually implemented on the ground.
Some analysts have suggested that the M23 rebel group stalling a peace deal might be a strategic move to push its demands. How significant is this in terms of understanding their behavior for better success in talks?
Oh, absolutely. I think obviously, as I mentioned earlier, the M23 have a huge amount of leverage. They control two provincial capitals, and have, we've known for some years now that the M23 are an incredibly strong rebel group. Again, they have Rwandan backing. There are Rwandan troops in eastern DRC. Militarily, they are far superior to the Congolese army. So at any point in time, they could pick up and pursue their military campaign. That's obviously at the back of the minds of all the parties that are negotiating here.
Does it mean then for any peace talks to happen within the DRC, the rebel group needs to take the upper hand in terms of their demands and have those listened to?
No, I don't think so. I think that, again, I mean, what we really need is a peace process where we have all the parties at the table. One of the key problems is that Rwanda is not willing to acknowledge that it is playing a substantial role in supporting the M23, despite vast evidence and truly vast objective evidence from UN panels of experts, NGOs, and so on and so forth. There's really no dispute anymore about Rwanda's role, but Rwanda refuses to acknowledge it. And that makes it very difficult to negotiate with those who actually have the power. So Rwanda fundamentally controls the M23. They are not making autonomous decisions. So it's really what Rwanda's agenda is that we're addressing here in a setting where you don't have Rwanda at the table. And that's inevitably a very complicating factor. Now, the Rwandan government is arguing that it's the FDLR, the remnants of the Rwandan Hutu a group that committed the genocide, that is their fundamental security problem. But this is something that they have used as a justification to continue to intervene in the eastern DRC for some 30 years. And there are many, many other issues. So I think we also have a key problem here with Rwanda, which really doesn't want to concede, I think, at this point, the territory that it has been able to gain through the M23. And I don't think it's willing to make concessions with regards to Kinshasa. It's not even willing at this point to accept that it has played a role. And that's a real sticking point, clearly.
We touched earlier on the humanitarian situation and how the conflict has displaced hundreds of thousands and caused high civilian casualties. But how does the humanitarian situation influence these negotiations? And does it even, bring an urgency to broker a deal? Is that even taken into consideration?
Unfortunately, not nearly as much as it should be. I mean, that should be the number one priority of all parties at this point. And we have to remember as well that we have an acute crisis now since the 2021 conflict reignited with the M23, but this is an area that's chronically insecure. We have many Congolese armed groups that are active there. Civilians are basically used as ping pongs between all the different parties. And there is no such thing as a secure place in Eastern DRC at this point. And this should be the number one priority for the mediators, for the different actors involved here. And unfortunately, it just isn't. And so we're looking at a civilian population that is really in an incredibly desperate situation. We've had, for example, the M23, since they've taken control of these areas, dissolve displaced camps and send people back to their original homes under conditions that are by no means ideal or far from ideal. People have no means to go to the fields. Schools are disrupted. I mean, these are incredibly complicated and difficult situations that that the civilian population is being forced to live in, and it's all taking far too long to resolve.
Right, and this as we commemorate World Humanitarian Day yesterday. Not much to celebrate there. Stephanie, we'll leave it there for today. Thanks again for your insights. We appreciate them.
Thank you very much.
Stephanie Wolters is Great Lakes Region Analyst, Senior Research Fellow at the South African Institute of International Affairs and Director of Okapi Consulting.
Ahoy, mate!